Facing charges that could lead to a 10-year prison sentence, the computer hacker known as Electron appeared in court today in what is the first computer crime case to be tried in Australia.
Tell me, in your own words, what fascination do you have with accessing computers overseas?
It's not for any kind of personal gain or anything. It's just the kick of getting into a system. I mean, once you're in, you often get bored, and even though you still have access to the system, you may never call back. So I guess it's the challenge and the ego boost you get from doing something like that. Whereas other people try and fail. In the late 1980s, before there was public access to the internet, I was a computer hacker. And I was part of a hacking group known as The Realm.
You? Woo! Say hi! Say hi!
Electron was born in an outer suburb of Melbourne. His father was a music teacher, and his mother worked in a university.
Mum was involved in computers. And I often wondered afterwards if that had anything to do with pushing me in that direction. I started writing computer programs with a pencil and paper when I was very young. I'd bought a book on basic computer programming which was aimed at kids. I think I wrote a primitive Space Invaders type program.
Right.
My mother was very sick during this period.
What time was that?
And I remember the phone ringing, and while I couldn't hear the other end of the conversation, it was obvious that my mother had passed away. Mum's death had a huge impact on my father. He was pretty shattered by it, and I don't think he ever fully got over it. The school where my father was teaching music was reasonably progressive as far as getting computers into education went. And during the school holiday periods, when they didn't need them, he would bring one home and let me play with it.
Wanting to know more about this world he had discovered, Electron bought his own computer when he was 16. At the same time, he read an article about how computer hackers had caused satellites to be moved in space.
That motivated my wanting to get a modem. It was a 300 baud, and it was $90 at the time. The modem was responsible for turning my interest in computers into an obsession.
Using his modem, Electron could now connect to a world he'd only read about. He soon discovered that Melbourne was the capital of this international electronic community.
It's hard to say exactly why hacking was centered in Melbourne in the 1980s, but I think some factors were the weather. You had a kind of backyard tinkerers culture. I think there may have also been the fact that Melbourne has long been seen as an intellectual capital in Australia, and maybe in some way this fosters the intellectual curiosity that was such a common theme among the underground at that time. In the late 1980s, the computer underground was a very friendly community. It was like an open-air bazaar. People didn't exchange money, they exchanged information. It was in many ways quite an innocent place where people would use handles instead of their real names to communicate online. They would take on a handle-like force that would imply they were powerful in some way, or Electron slipping under the net, or Phoenix. They could excel within this community through technical prowess and receive accolades from their peers that they weren't getting elsewhere in their lives.
Dad was in charge of the emergency teachers stuff, so we had a kind of informal agreement that I'd keep the phone free in the mornings for the teachers to ring in sick, and he'd be able to organise an emergency. We'd have relatives ring up and say, "We've been trying to get through for days." So we eventually told them to ring at the same time as the emergency teachers rang.
All right. Okay.
I was spending 18 hours a day, sometimes more, breaking into computers. All day, or as it normally was, all night. And it didn't make my father very happy when the phone bills came in.
Right, so we're going to pay for this. Just leave me alone. I'm confiscated.
In the context of having quite a few arguments in the family situation, the keyboard and the screen don't argue. They do what you tell them to do.
There were people who had difficulty and would be more comfortable in front of a keyboard than they would be in a social setting. You know, it's difficult for teenage boys anyway for all kinds of social reasons, and so the emergence of computing, which was this sort of supremely asocial world, was very comfortable for them. Before the movie War Games, hackers had been people who were around institutions like Stanford and MIT and were obsessed with big machines. It had nothing to do with breaking into computers. After the movie War Games, the term hacker came in the popular mind to be a teenage kid who spent his time breaking into computers. So it changed the meaning of the term hacker forever. I think War Games also created something of a model of behavior for kids who saw it as being cool to travel in these networks.
War Games had a major impression on the psyche of the whole underground. It was the whole cloak and dagger thing, that there were security agencies and that type of thing involved. The first time I broke into NASA, I would have been 16, maybe 17. The feeling of exhilaration I felt was in direct proportion to the importance of the computer system that I was breaking into. So, yeah, breaking into NASA was very exhilarating. I felt it was an important step in my hacking career.
As Electron continued to develop his hacking skills, he formed an online relationship with another rising star of the computer underground, a hacker known as Phoenix.
When I first knew of Phoenix, he was a user of telephone calling cards, which allowed him to make free international calls. But the fact that he seemed to have a constant supply of these cards made him quite popular, because he was able to download lots of pirated software from the US and to access all of their hacking sites. It was a relationship of convenience, really. Phoenix was just far too brash, and that brashness rubbed me up the wrong way. There were things that Phoenix wouldn't have got from me if I'd had the same modem speed that he did.